Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
And my pleasure now to welcome back to the program Ralph McAlister. Good morning to you, sir.
And good morning to you, my friend. Have you got the red carpet out for me?
Well, I thought that was the case at Paper Plus because I can almost see the smile on your face because, of course, you've had your first visit to a bookshop for quite some time.
Yes, but the point has been that both my friends, Kay and Rob, in Paraparaumu at Paper Plus have been somehow managing to get proof copies, of which I'll talk about one in a moment, while it's all been in lockdown. And it's been personal deliveries, and I've been so thrilled and looked after by them that I thought yesterday when I went to the place for the first time in 8 weeks, was it going to be Pack and Save first or Paper Plus? I chose Paper Plus, and the warmth of the welcome was wonderful. But what I wanted to say to your readers and listeners, John, is I'm not going to really talk to people if they don't go and buy a book this week or two or three, so that these local bookstores and bookshops can get back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Because no longer can we suggest that books are not important. The intensity of our reading must have gone up because that's one of the joys of living.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that people have found some solace and some sustenance in their reading over the last 8 weeks. And you did write about buying local. That's so important. And that's one of the beauties. It's not a commercial for Paper Plus, but that is one of the beauties of the Paper Plus chain. While it is a chain, they're all individually locally owned as well.
Yeah, and I know from experience here in Paraparaumu, it's deeply local, but also when I'm up in Waiheke, I get the same sort of quality service. Well, not quite. It's a smaller organisation, but Papers Plus up there has been looking after me when I go up there every year. So anyway, it's enough to say, please, if you're not buying anything, buy a book. And if you're not buying anything except a cheese scone, go and have a look at the bookshop. You might be tempted. And on that note, I'll talk to you about a book which I just finished last night called The Museum of Broken Promises. And it's by Elizabeth Bachen, I think her name is. And she's quite a well-known author. I've never read her before, but it was one of those things that found its way to me during the lockdown. It's quite an interesting book. It's not totally my cup of tea or book, but it's about Laura, who has a museum in Paris, in modern-day Paris, and it's, as the title suggests, it's got a collection of artifacts from people who just bring their pieces in and leave them, and she decides whether to display them or not. But they all have a story about promises that have been broken. So it might be a bus ticket, it might be a doll, it might be a piece of a veil from a wedding. So you've got this wonderful introduction to the story where she is the boss, and it's a daring museum, and it has been given funding by some of the locals. And I really got quite excited about the beginning because it's such an unusual premise for a novel. Anyway, she then, of course, once she establishes, the writer, that in the reader's perspective, we go back to Prague in 1980s, Czechoslovakia, and that's where she was growing up, and she went and fell in love with a Czechoslovakian man. And the story flashes back and forward from 1980s to back to modern day Paris. It's flashbacks, and you know what that means. It means that sometimes you get a bit annoyed because you want to stay with one and you go to another and so on. But it's a lovely story, and it becomes very political, and she falls in love but she's half French and half English, so she doesn't understand the politics of post Dubček and the terrible times that took place in not just in Russia, but of course in Prague and in Czechoslovakia. So it's a political story, a love story, and a museum story. And if I were to choose, I think I'd choose the museum story. It never pushes that as much as I thought it should, because there are all sorts of fascinating little people who come, not little people, but people who come in and say to her, to Laura, would you like to think about putting this in your museum? And she always says yes, and we can let you have it back if you don't want us to keep it. I love the whole idea of that, and I love artifacts and drama and theatre, but it sort of moves over to the political and spends, I think, a bit too much time there, and whether or not Thomas, the love of her life, is alive or dead in present day, Europe. I think a lot of people will enjoy this very much. I would give it 3 out of 5 or thereabouts. It's a good story, but it falters for me. I just got a bit sick of the politics. I wanted more of the love, but more of the museum. And, she's a very good writer. There's no doubt about that. But I just felt as if I'd been dangled on a string a bit. And, I just couldn't get as invested in her and Berlin and Prague and Paris as I wanted to be in the actual museum. So it's a sort of half and halfway recommendation, but it's still available, I believe, soon at Paper Plus in Paraparaumu.
Well, what a surprise. I'm looking forward to that one. I love the premise of that museum, and I'm very intrigued. Would the bus ticket come along with the story that explains where the broken promises occurred?
Well, that's very clever of you to ask. You haven't seen the cover, but one of the pieces on the cover, there's a little cartoon of a bus ticket from Czechoslovakia and to Paris or somewhere else. And you think immediately, right, now is that going to be realized in, and so some of them are and some of them aren't. So it's a flawed piece of good writing, let's put it that way.
Sounds like a very good idea, though. It really does. Yeah. Wonderful. I wish I'd thought of that one. And lovely, once again, for you to illuminate our path. Ralph, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for your company.
You're welcome. Next week will come soon enough, I hope.
I hope so. Thank you very much, Ralph McAlister.
106.3 Beach FM.